Okay, so this video is for all future students, current students, and it's an ode to all of the students I've had in more than 20 years of teaching. Because today I'm going to offer tips to students who need to make an ask of a teacher or a professor. Let me tell you, I have taught literally thousands of law students for more than 2 decades. So while this video is for students, it's kind of secretly for professors, because I have been on the receiving end of many requests from students through the years, and I have a very lively sense of strategies that work and strategies that fail. So if you're a student who maybe needs to ask for an extension on a paper or a homework assignment, this video is for you. So in this video, I'm going to offer 4 key tips for succeeding in your negotiation with your teacher or professor. These are time-tested, real tips that will help you. But if you watch to the end, I'm also going to share some guidance on what I would call loser strategies to avoid. That is, things that teachers and professors seem to find annoying and that backfire. Okay, so here's the first tip, which is when you are thinking about making a request to your teacher or a professor, think about what their interests might be as well. It is normal when you're making a request to think about your own needs and your own interests. But the mistake is to not consider what might matter to the teacher. Now, here's a secret. Most teachers, not everyone, most teachers actually have an interest in being helpful and being empathic and being sensitive and, believe it or not, even in being kind. But also most teachers also have an interest in making sure any policy they make is fair not just to you, but to the rest of the class. And so when you are framing your requests, make sure that you do it in a way that acknowledges and recognizes the interests of the teacher. So another interest a teacher or professor often has is maximizing your learning. So when you're preparing, think about your interests, think about common teacher interests, right? They include being fair to the students, being kind to you, making sure you learn, making sure school policies are enforced. Sometimes, so for example, as someone who taught in a law school, I also felt that I had some obligations to the profession as well and to the rules of the school. Okay, so a piece of advice number 2 relates to how are you going to frame your request when you are meeting with your professor or teacher. And I want to suggest that anytime you are framing a request, you frame it as an opportunity for you to learn or for you to produce the best possible work product. This is particularly the case if you're asking for an extension on a deadline, or maybe to change the nature of an assignment, or maybe to do an assignment with a colleague instead of just yourself. One way of framing it, right, is to say something like, things have been really stressful, or I have a lot on my plate. So I know that when a student comes to me saying that they're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, I'm seriously empathic toward them. There's nothing more that I want to do than to give them an extension. At the same time, usually that request is coming like at the end of the semester. I have 90 other students. They're probably also stressed and overwhelmed. So I'm feeling seriously empathic toward them. At the same time, I'm also aware of the fact that I have 90 other students who are also feeling really stressed. And so there's a side of me that also knows I need to be fair and just in terms of course requirements. So a better way to frame a request like this is to frame it in terms of the desire to make this the best possible educational experience, or in order to learn as much as possible, or in order to really produce the best possible work product. Those kinds of framing are much more sympathetic to my broad sets of interests as a teacher. In addition, let me tell you one thing that I would suggest you avoid. Going into your professor and saying, I really want to get an A, or I really want to get a good grade. Now, that might be surprising because you're thinking, well, I do want to get an A, and I do want to get a good grade. Why is that a turnoff to a teacher? Now, to be clear, right, some teachers might actually be fine with that, but I think for many of us, the reason why we are teaching is because we want students to get excited about our topic and to get excited about learning. And so hearing someone come in and ask the question, what do I need to do just to get a good grade, feels really deflating. Instead, come in and say, I am loving this topic so much. I would love to understand what else should I be reading? What are the kinds of things people who succeed in this topic do? Anything that makes me feel like your interest is around learning is going to work better. Similarly, if you're going in and asking for feedback from a professor, going in and saying, I would really like to learn what I could have done differently on this paper and what worked, is much better than going in and saying something like, tell me why I got the grade that I did. Tell me why I got the grade that I did sounds like the professor needs to defend or justify the grade. It sends a signal that you're not that interested in actually improving and learning. You're just wondering how to get a better grade. Okay, third really important piece of advice is that when you're going into a professor or a teacher to ask them something, always give that professor or teacher a good and positive role. This is consistent with negotiation advice, which is that I can either go in and basically ask for something with the implication that if you don't give it to me, you're mean, you're a problem, you don't care about me, or I can go in and frame that request in a way that allows the teacher's yes to be seen as being the hero, the helper, the great educator. So let me give you an example. This occurred many, many years ago. You'll see how many years ago given the nature of the example. So in the early 2000s, when I was teaching at Harvard Law School, students would have to write a 3-page journal after each class. Okay, that's not dated. Students still do that. Here's what's dated. They would actually have to print the journal out on real paper and then come and actually hand it into a box outside my office. Can you imagine that? But that was the rule. That's what we had been doing. And in the early 2000s, at the end of a class one day, a student raises their hand and says, "Oh, professor, would you mind if we emailed our journals instead?" And I said, and just to be clear, I want you to know I've changed since then. But I said, it's really kind of inconvenient to read this on email. No, I'd really prefer for you to hand it out. And then the student said, well, it would be much more convenient for us if we could just email it. Now, this was a terrible way to negotiate for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, and related to this point, the role that I had been given is meanie and bad guy who didn't care about students' convenience. Secondly, the student challenged me in front of the entire class. So even if the student's argument was persuasive, he forced my hand in a way that I had no other choice but to say no, because otherwise it looked like I could be bullied. I want to contrast that with a more recent example of another set of students coming in and talking with me about course requirements. And in this case, the students did this not in front of the whole class. They did it in a way that understood my own perspective about why I had the requirements that I had, and framed their request in ways that made me feel that any way I could say yes, even if it wasn't to their whole request, was a win. That framing difference is really important. The last piece of advice is really critical and in some sense relates to the last two examples I gave you, which is choosing the right time and the right place to make your ask. So think about the examples I just gave you. In the middle of class, I'm going to challenge a professor, and if they say no, I'm going to keep challenging. or I'm going to pick an appropriate time, make an appointment, and then talk to the professor about it. So let me tell you about a tendency that I notice from students that I would suggest you don't do. It's after class, there's a bunch of people asking questions, and then a student is hanging back and at the end comes up and says, oh, professor, I was wondering, instead of writing a paper, could I do a YouTube video instead? Or could I, do a podcast? And I'm thinking, this is terrible timing. I have been standing here for 15 minutes answering questions, and you're now coming in and asking for a complete redo of the course assignment at a time when I'm completely exhausted. Instead, wait for office hours or come up to the professor and say, I wanted to ask you about a course assignment. Can we set up some time? Or at the very least, say, I have a question that I think might require a longer answer. Should I discuss it with you now or should we wait? But somehow the notion that the end of class is the time to make some big ask of the professor is a big mistake. Okay, so I hope some of this is helpful to you because students ought to negotiate with their professors. They ought to ask questions, and students have some really compelling needs. Sometimes you need an extension on the paper. Sometimes you have a lot of creative energy and do want to change the assignment. Sometimes there's things going on in your family and your personal life that need adjustment. But if you want to succeed, here are 4 tips to make it work. First, think about both your interests and also your professor's interests. Secondly, when you're framing your request, frame it as an opportunity for you to have the best learning experience possible to produce the best result, the best paper, the best product. Third, make sure that you give your teacher a good role. It is much easier to say yes if my yes means I'm a hero and a winner than if my no means I'm the villain and a bad guy. And lastly, choose the time and place for this negotiation. Do it when the professor is in the right mood. Do it in a way that doesn't embarrass the professor or put the professor on the spot or when they're completely exhausted. So, if you want to learn more about how to negotiate, watch this next video, which talks about how to negotiate when the other side has more power. And if you want to make this teacher feel really happy, please like this video. Please ring the bell so you're notified when I have more videos. Please subscribe to this channel. And yes, share this video with all of your friends and your professors. Okay, click, click. You want to keep watching. Don't go off this channel. Keep binge watching.